Okay, I think we're ready to go. So evening everyone, and thank you all for tuning in for our very first in a series of talks for this year's Architecture Fringe, where we'll be chatting to some of Scotland's most talented residential architects. We have 3 talks planned over the coming weeks, so if you're not signed up to any of the other talks with TAP Architects or Archer and Braun, feel free to drop into our website and sign up. My name is Dean. I'm joined by my colleague Christopher. He's going to give us a little wave. And together we're the team behind We Design Homes. We recently launched We Design Homes as a new service to connect enthusiastic homeowners with some of the best design-led architects from across the UK and Ireland. Whether you're looking for a refurbishment, extension, or even to build a new home, please get in touch with us and we can see how we can help.
Thank you very much, Dean. We're really pleased to welcome Matt and Ian tonight, directors at the wonderful Loader Monteith Architects. Matt and Ian will be taking us through a journey of their most recent projects and talking to us about the importance of design for living and learning, playing, growing, meeting, and more, all of course with sustainability in mind. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we will have a short Q&A at the end of the session. So gentlemen, I might hand it over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much indeed, Christopher. Well, hello everyone. I will share my screen and we'll make a start. Right. Can everyone see that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Well, good. Good. So thank you ever so much to We Design Homes and also to the Architecture Fringe for allowing us to talk to you all this evening. It's really exciting to be involved in the Architecture Fringe again. And just to reiterate what Christopher and Dean have said, if you are looking at thinking about making changes to your house, please get in touch with them. They're a really wonderful referral service, and they really understand the value in good design. So, who are Loader Monteith? Well, I'm Matt Loader, and
yes, I'm Ian Monteith. That might have my name down there. So.
And we are a Glasgow-based architects practice. Ian and I have 3 staff who are significantly more talented than we are, and we're waiting for them to work out that that's the case. Where do we work? Well, we work in cities, in suburbs, in villages, and in the countryside over the whole of the UK. So we have projects from the Highlands right down to London and to the south coast of England. What do we do? Well, we do quite a lot of interventions from small scale right up to larger scale new build houses, alterations, extensions. We want to make each project really special because they're each a reflection of our clients. We also work on other projects which aren't domestic. So I'm just going to show a couple of quick slides of a learning hub for a school, a residential care school, which really does actually tap in quite well to the idea of well-being, but that's a conversation for another day. And so these are just some images of that, which is in the grounds of a listed building surrounded by very mature trees. And we're really excited that that should get onto site later this year. And this is our first office building, which is just about to finish. It's very domestic in scale, which meant that it was a comfortable step for us to get to. And again, we're really excited to be able to share that in due course. So when we were approached about this, I think the question that we really asked ourselves is, well, what is well-being? And we came across, or Ian came across, a rather good tag from Sir Harry Burns, which I'll let Ian talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so in a previous life, I used to work in healthcare projects, and as part of that, I attended a talk by Sir Harry Burns, a version of which is on YouTube. I think you should, go and watch it if you're interested in well-being and design and how important it is. But it was from there that I was first became aware of the term salutogenesis, which is a combination of salus, which is Latin for health, and genesis, which is Greek for origin. So rather than pathogenesis, which talks about disease or the cause of disease, this was a term coined by Aaron Antonovsky in terms of looking at the causes of wellness and how we can create wellness and engender wellness. And that really is about balance and a sense of coherence in your life. And also we then have taken that and we look at that in our designs in terms of how we work with clients. And we see that as part of our role in terms of how we can help create a peace of mind and create a wellness through the home and a balance and a sense of coherence. So it really underpins a lot of our projects and a lot of our thinking. Which may seem a strange, slightly more technical or scientific way of looking at it, but it is an interesting way to look at it.
Okay. I think the idea of health, comfort, and happiness is pretty ancient. It goes right back to Vitruvius and his 3 corners, and that does underpin a lot of good architecture. So it's not rocket science for all. It's a salutogenesis is this scientific approach. It's not rocket science. A lot of what I think aspire to do as architects. So without further ado, we'll start talking about some of our projects. This is the first one that we're going to have a look at, and this is a really nice quote. "Out of the essential, you structure the junction of the poetic and the rational. They must come together, never separate, always together." And good old Glenn Murcutt. So this is a project that we've been working on for a few years now, which sits in the South Lanarkshire landscape. It's in Greenbelt lands, south of Glasgow, surrounded by agricultural fields. So the site is ringed there on that aerial photograph. And this is a view out towards the site. So that collection of barns was the site that we were given. So we were approached by a client that effectively wanted to build a farmhouse for his family to grow up in. And we had a really fascinating briefing process with them, where we wanted to draw a parallel between the cycle of birth, growth, maturity, and renewal in the surrounding farmland with family life in the building itself, and to connect visually and metaphorically what goes on in the surrounding landscape with the house itself, and so to have this connection to nature and to the outside. So there was this very ramshackle collection of rather dangerous buildings that existed on the site when we first visited. You can see these here. If you look at the top image, the right-hand side of that gable, you'll notice is leaning precariously out from underneath the roof, and it actually fell down not long after that photograph was taken. So we always feel really quite unsure about taking buildings down to put something back again, and that is a core theme that runs through this building, is how can we make the most of what's already there. That includes visual linkages to the site, but also in material terms as well. And Ian will talk about that in a few minutes. We became really interested with this idea of enclosure and of making a safe environment for a family. And when you start looking at the building clusters in open landscape, you notice that buildings tend to be grouped and clustered together so that there is this sense of enclosure and this calm space. And this was really a key driver for this project of how we group the house. And we also really like a lot of the materials, which are pretty modest and humble, that are used in agricultural buildings. So, with a solid masonry base and something rather lighter above it. And it's very commonly this iron oxide red metal cladding. And that's really fed all the way through into the house itself. So this was the initial diagram, pretty much the very first set of diagrams that we did for the house, which described The fact that this is in the middle of the working farm and that there was going to need to be farm access around, but the family who have young children needed to be safe and secure to run around. So how you effectively take the site, which is in the top left-hand corner, there's access required through it. So you almost build a wall around it that then becomes inhabited, that you then allow to open into a courtyard in one direction, and you control the views out into the landscape the other direction. And then you start to articulate the roof so that it reflects the nearby building typologies, so that it doesn't feel incongruous in its setting. It feels like part of its landscape. This is the plan for the house. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting about it is that the client also likes karate. And so he wanted a karate studio within effectively this walled garden that we were proposing. And he also wanted an office, but he wanted that separated from the house. I think this is probably something that we can all relate to this year, is actually having the ability to leave your door and walk to work or to go somewhere else to work can be quite nice. And that's really, been borne out in the last 12 months. So this is the plan. And you can see there's effectively an L shape, and then also the separate karate studio and office as a separate object. There's a leg, which is the living wing, a rather impressive corner, which we can talk about, which was this private reading space, and then a sleeping wing to the house. Section showing this idea of a grouping of roofs within the site, and an axonometric showing this idea of arriving underneath a canopy that starts to protect a walled garden on the inside. So this project is 25th of June, isn't it, that we're due to have handover, Monty? Is that right?
Well, you've said it now, so absolutely.
Okay.
Let's hope the client isn't watching.
Yeah, so this is a 3D render of the project. As Matt says, it's on site. It's due to complete at the end of this month. So, and Matt mentioned the materiality, and that's such a strong theme throughout this building. And really, the client has been so committed to the materiality and the reuse of materials.
I suppose that's half the challenge, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, there's definite aspects of this project, and every project's the same. You know, it wouldn't be the same, you know, if the client didn't have that input. But there's things like the brick floor that we'll talk about, and the external stonework. That's all reclaimed from the buildings that were there previously. So there's that combination, and that's why it's, you know, entitled recreation. You know, we're taking those materials, we're taking those former houses, and we're giving them a new life. You know, so buildings that perhaps were, you know, the best part of 100 years old, maybe longer, are now, you know, coming back to life and forming part of this new house, alongside those agricultural materials such as the sinusoidal cladding. So you can see there that's the courtyard with the studio on the left-hand side. And one of the aspects Matt touched upon was about that glazing and having that connection throughout the building to the landscape. So you get these long connections to the south over the farm, and then you get these short connections to the north, looking into the courtyard. And on both sides around the perimeter, obviously, you know, it's still a working farm. So the idea is that the building, you know, offers protection, you know, in terms of the courtyard, and allows a place for the kids to play safely. Or it can be, you know, can be controlled as they grow up and understand where they live. They'll then, you know, take more educated moves around the site, you know. And then we're looking at the materials throughout the studio, things like larch, the slate, reflecting the previous buildings that were there, and then the agricultural, the sinusoidal cladding, and the stone, as I've mentioned, being reused. And really, one of the aspects of what we do is how we bring these materials together. You know, materials that may seem ordinary, you can treat them in such a way that they become extraordinary. You know, it's in the detailing, it's how they're joined together, it's how you turn the corner. And in this aspect here, we're actually, the building turns a corner to address the existing working barn on the west side of the building. And the next image will show that. So that's the west elevation. So you can see that that's got quite a dramatic departure from the stone aspect and the courtyard aspect. And that was a deliberate choice, you know, because there still will be active use on that elevation. You can already see it's pretty, pretty workman-like, you know, so a workyard there. And there's something nice about that, you know. It's not a show home in many ways. It's a working farm and it's a family home, and we've been careful with the detailing and the materials. But you know, a lot of the surroundings of the building we won't be able to control. It is a working place and it's a family home. So. And coming back to the idea about well-being and the themes, you know, the client in particular has a passion for books, and also his young children. So anyone with young children will realise, you know, teaching your kids to read and spending that time with them is a fundamental requirement of childhood. You know, so providing that opportunity for the family to gather, read a book. Or even as an individual, when eventually you get them off to bed, you can go and get a bit of peace and quiet, and watch the, you know, still be connected to the farm. It's a fantastic sunset as well, from that location, and yeah, so that coherence and making sense of those spaces. This is a snapshot of the brickwork. Much of the brickwork is actually covered up, or has been covered up, so we've not been able to kind of show that. Although if you've been on our Instagram, you'll already seen snippets of that. But there was over 4,000 bricks reclaimed and cleaned by the client, so that's commitment.
Dedication.
Dedication, absolutely. And that will really be fundamental to the identity of this house. And they have their story, you know, the fact that they've came from the houses that were there previously and they have this new life. And as Matt touched on, you know, maintaining that connection to the landscape throughout the circulation. You know, there's no dead ends. You know, you get an L-shaped plan. Potentially you could have a corridor situation, but we've managed to maintain those connections, north, south, east and west, to the landscape, and incorporating things like reading areas, bookshelves, and sliding doors that allow, you know, spaces to open up or close down depending on the mood or the atmosphere required. And again, you know, exposing the roof and incorporating, you know, lighting in a clever way as well just elevates it. And that's a view across the landscape. So you can see the house on the right-hand side with the red tile, that's the current house that they live in. And then the new project just sits in the middle there. So we're referencing the profile of the existing house. And actually, it doesn't, you know, for all it's a big house, and from that point of view, from the main road, it doesn't look to be much bigger than the existing house. But it is.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So the next category that we wanted to talk about was transformation. I think it's pretty common for people to want to extend their houses, and to the point at which they approach an architect, they're set on doing so. There is no cheaper space than the space that you already have. That's an absolute truism. And so before making the decision to add more space, you want to make sure that you have every existing piece of area that you have working as hard as possible before coming to that conclusion. And so we just want to, I think, reasonably quickly talk about a couple of projects where we didn't add any space, but we did reorganize the inside of two properties to interesting effect. George W. Bush, when he said this word salad, I'm sure we all thought, God, he is the worst president ever. But boy, were we wrong. Anyway, families is where our nation finds hope, where wings take dream. Complete word salads, but absolutely right in terms of the aspiration and what the intention of this. These homes have been about making family life better and making spaces where families can grow and mingle together and enjoy being in each other's company. Again, I'm sure we all have a thought on that over the past few months. So this is a little project on the south side of Glasgow. It's in a previously subdivided villa in a conservation area, and there was this single-story piece to the building at the back of it, which historically contained the kitchen, which was remarkably dark considering it was single story, and it felt very cut off from the rest of the property. So here on the left is the original plan, which you can see the kitchen in that sort of bottom section. And then the right-hand image is the proposed plan. So what we really wanted to do with this was to pull the kitchen back towards the middle of the property, towards the main living room, and to make a day room that was just for sitting in through the daytime, that was out into the garden, and making a few more windows into that to connect with things like the height that you sit at in a sofa, to have a long slot window opposite that connects you to the outside. And effectively it was just this rationalization of the spaces to allow there to be this clear distinction between what that garden room is, the main living room in the house, and having that kitchen a bit closer to the middle of the property. And an axonometric. So one of the things that we proposed, and it was very suck it and see at the time, was what happens if we take down the original ceiling and expose the ceiling ties that come across this. So as that dropped, we found these really beautiful old timber ties that were running across the place, and we decided to leave those on show and to put roof light above them. There was a back door, and what we wanted was a utility box next to that back door, so that upon arriving you could kick your boots off or hang your coat up, and that housed all of the gubbins of life of having a family, muddy boots and whatnot. And then this is how it turned out. So there were pretty dramatic introduction of new windows to the space, and framing those views as well. Now, the clients for this project, I have to say, have unbelievable taste. So they were incredibly good at picking out things like paint colors and floors and the like, and it really shines through with the project. So this is the garden room as imagined. So on the left-hand image, you can see the sofa with a horizontal slot window, so that as you sit down, you get a framed view of the garden out beyond that.
Very nice.
And a series of the materials, as I said. There's a degree of, I think, honesty in terms of putting on show the original bricks. And this was a reclaimed gym hall floor that the clients found in salvage. And the doors were all, again, salvaged for this. So we reused as much as possible, again, of things that we could find throughout the course of the project. And I think it really adds a richness in patina to the project.
Just want to say, Matt, on that last image there, the view that was achieved, that view on the right hand side, that was achieved by moving the door, and circulation, actually aligning that with the window allowed you then to get that direct view from the circulation from the front door, in effect, right through to the garden at the back. So just really introducing the garden into the house right through.
One of those simple changes that can have a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And then because it's an old stone villa, it has really thick walls, and it did provide us with opportunities for making seats within the depth of the wall, like this image shows. Right, I'm going to hand over to you again, Ian.
Yeah, following on from the previous project, there was lessons learned from that, but there was a really a lovely piece of feedback from the client that talked about how we had managed to change the psychology of the space, and in particular, again, two young children that the back of the house was separated off really from the garden. There was a solid door that really, when the kids went out to play, that door closed itself behind them. So there was a visual connection. That connection was lost with their mum and dad, in terms of making the dinner. And the kids would be coming back in for reassurance. And likewise, the parents, if you can't see them playing, there's an unease, you don't have that peace of mind that you're talking about. So they were really saying that we managed to, resolve that issue. So it's not often we, put up pictures of old toilets to try and sell our ideas, but this was the access to the back garden. So just to the left hand side of the toilet there was the door, and there's a little window behind that toilet seat. So if you go on to the next image, Matt. So that's the same space. So that window, the slot window, was behind the toilet, and then we really took away that best part of that gable, and we took out that little toilet, and the kitchen was actually just next to that on the right hand side. But straight away, where I'm sitting at the moment is the new dining table. So you can be sitting, keep an eye on the kids while you're doing whatever you're doing in terms of work or what have you. Again, the kitchen space, similar to the previous project, we created that garden room, and it really allowed them to open up and create a new room that connected to the garden. So again, that's the same window and that same corner. Learning from previous projects, again, exposing the rafters, giving the volume back to that space, bringing in light, really just helped transform it. The next slide. So that was the previous, dining space with the kitchen, toilet at the back, and then on to the next one. And then that's as it is now. So we managed to open up that whole space, and there's a dining room on the left hand side where the doors are there. That was a previous dining room that was closed off by a solid, a wall, and that was a window. So we managed to drop the sill in there and give them a new door again connecting to the garden. So the kitchen's actually in there. So if you're standing making the dinner, you're able to see out into the garden, watch kids play, and they can see you. So and actually in the shelves in the middle of that image there, you see there's a window shelf that's been created, and that's inhabited by lots of kids' books and toys, and that's fantastic to see.
Very much. Okay. So the next that we wanted to talk about was adaptation. So this is a project that does involve extension, but also a fairly significant adaptation to an existing building as well. So a quote from David Chipperfield: "I think that the point of being an architect is to help raise the experience of everyday living, even a little, putting a window where people would really like one, making bureaucratic buildings that are somehow cheerful." I think that's again a pretty good description of this idea of adjoining function with delight. It's not necessarily particularly complicated, but actually that's what it is. It's celebrating the good in anything, and there's always interesting things. It doesn't matter how prosaic a building is, you can really make it sing with a bit of careful consideration and thought. So this is an old blonde sandstone villa in a part of it's a suburban town outside Glasgow called Lenzie, which there's a conservation area there that's full of these old villas. This one had previously been subdivided into 2 flats, and not particularly sympathetically, but our clients had acquired both of these properties and wanted to recombine it into a single house. Now, I think it's absolutely important that at this stage I say that the clients for this are themselves designers. So it was very much a collaboration between us and them to make this work and to make to work together. And it's a thing that actually we've done a few times. So we've had clients that are landscape architects, we've had architects a couple of times, we've had planners a few times as well, and we really like the agency of working with other people, and because you do get to see different ways of doing things. So when we approached this project, it was very much with that spirit of collaboration in mind, that we were looking to find a way to make this building work for them now and also into the future. So it was in a pretty poor state of repair. It had previously been extended and subdivided and had various alterations made to it, but it was surrounded by this very beautiful leafy suburb where the rich merchants in yesteryear of Glasgow, when they made their money in shipbuilding, moved out of the smelly city into the green air of the suburbs, and that's what Lenzie is. So we did these series of early sketches that showed this idea of connecting these internal volumes to the garden, which was south-facing, and making a courtyard that was shrouded by the mature trees. There's a Chinese proverb which I really love, which is the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is now. Well, this site had lots of mature trees, and so we were really careful to make sure that as we were designing, it was with those in mind, to make sure that we made the most of them and looked after them. And again, these are my early sketches showing this idea of enclosure and of courtyards and of engaging the garden with the house spaces inside to allow life to spill from inside to out, even in the west coast of Scotland, when the weather can be pretty iffy at times. So one of the things that we were aware was that the economics of this were likely to be difficult, and the clients were absolutely right in suggesting that we should future-proof the design as well, to think of it how, because it was previously 2 properties, how it could subsequently be, again, after we extend it, turned back into 2 properties, to allow effectively the budget at this stage to justify making the extent of interventions that we were proposing. So these 2 plans show where the extension was proposed and how there's you can see a garage and workshop to the rear, a pottery studio, and then a living kitchen dining extension, and how that could be adapted in future. So the plan in the top right shows how you could make effectively a single-story courtyard house and then turn the original villa, the part of the ground floor and the first floor back into a property down the line. So it allowed us to future-proof the design, and potentially if they ever get to the stage that they can't get up and downstairs, they could move into the courtyard house and have slightly less building to look after.
Did you find that particularly challenging though, to meet their needs of kind of now, but then drastically changing the property later on?
I think once the idea of extending in these locations, in these parts of the house, had been settled upon, the idea of splitting it as a single-story courtyard house and the original villa, it wasn't so difficult, but it was only after we had got to the point at which we'd worked out where the building work was going to be, I think. So
okay.
yeah, there were aspects that we had to do. So for example, in the floor of the garage, at this stage it's not insulated, but it has to be lower than the house so that when insulation is added, you bring the floor levels so that they're level effectively. So there was a bit of future proofing in the technicalities of it, but it wasn't insurmountable by any stretch because we had that working plan in place.
Right.
So these are renders that we carried out at planning stage to show the concept. And then this is it upon completion. One of the things, because it's a conservation area, that we really want there to be a sort of an echo of the original house in the extension, and I think you can see that in the shape of the roof as delivered.
Definitely.
And then this is the extension. You can see there it houses a living room and also the kind of main kitchen, which spills south onto a terrace and then out into the garden space itself. And then this is the extension. I'm looking forward to going back and seeing this pretty soon, because I think that the courtyard is one of the areas which was just finished when we had it photographed, and I expect that with the client's very green fingers, it's going to be looking rather different now to how it did when we had it photographed. Again, on the inside of the building, we wanted this clear legibility between the original house and the new extension. So there's a very marked difference in how we were dealing with things like the decorative plasterwork, the floor finishes. So you can see there's a parquet floor in the top left image, whereas the extension, which is the right-hand image, has a floated concrete floor and this smoked oak. It's very neutral and very simple. So that, there were a couple of places where we had to make interventions in the original property because, for example, the original staircase had been taken away, but that presented us an opportunity to start putting in a new stair. And you can see those again in oak. This is the client's pottery studio. We wanted this to be quite a messy space. So there's the original wall was left exposed. The materials aren't particularly expensive. It's just painted engineering grade timber to the roof, but actually that ability to introduce diffuse light to the space to make a sort of a messy working space was really important to us. And it's actually one of my favorite rooms in the house, this. And again, I'm really looking forward to seeing it now. It's full of bits of pottery.
paint everywhere.
Yeah. And then these are the two new staircases that we introduced. So the image on the left shows the stained glass window that was halfway up the stairs, and the open treads that we had to allow that to be visible upon arrival at the house. So to flood the middle of the house with natural light. And I think it's really clear that these are both modern interventions within the original house as well, by how they've been treated. So the last category we wanted to talk about was restoration and conservation. In the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. We were contacted by a former client of ours who happened to work for Historic Environment Scotland to ask if we'd like to be considered for the restoration of an A-listed fire-damaged house. Now, we immediately assumed that it was going to be a Victorian pile somewhere in Edinburgh or the south side of Glasgow, because there's quite a lot of them. But we said absolutely yes. We were absolutely devastated when we found out that it was this house, because I think, like pretty much every architect in the UK, when it was for sale on the Modern House, we saw it and lusted after it and admired it. So when it was broken to us that there had been a fire at High Sunderland, we were absolutely shocked.
Not so these are architects, Matt, I can assure you.
Say again, sorry?
Not just architects, I can assure you.
Yeah. So anyway, these are some original photographs of High Sunderland, which is a house designed for Bernard Klein by the architect Peter Womersley, that was finished in 1957. So it's, as you can see, a modernist house. It's set in open landscape of the Scottish borders. I think I hate to use the word iconic, but this does feel like an iconic house. It's there are only 2 Category A listed modernist houses in Scotland, of which this is one. And I have to say, I think it's for very good reason. It's an absolutely beautiful piece of architecture. Peter Womersley and Bernard Klein had a long relationship after this property. Bernard Klein drove past one of Womersley's houses, Farnley Hay, and went and knocked on the door and asked who his architect was. And it was only about 2 weeks later that Womersley was engaged to design this house for Bernard Klein. So these are the photos of it as it originally was. And these are the photos that we took upon our first arrival. So Bernard Klein, when it was sold, which I think was 2017 or 18, it was sold to a couple of architectural historians who had relocated to New York. Bernard Klein clearly hadn't had a fire in a while, or our clients were incredibly unlucky, because what happened was a fire was set in the fireplace and there was a crack in the brickwork of the chimney through which hot embers got out into the roof void and set a low burning fire going. So it wasn't completely devastated, but you can see that there was very, very significant damage to the most important part of the building. And part of the complexity of this house is that there's nowhere for that stuff to hide. So the travertine floor is onto a hard surface underneath. The timber flooring is directly where the fire from the fire department through water. So it damaged very significantly the floor. The soot got into the pores of all of the brickwork and the timber work and the stonework. And we lost a lot of the original ceiling work as well. So again, some more images of the extent of the damage that we saw when we arrived.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was very sobering indeed walking around it. Now, Ian and I are incredibly lucky to have somebody working for us called Ian King, who was the project architect on the restoration of Glasgow School of Arts historically. So talk about a niche skill. He is expert in restoring fire damaged A-listed buildings now after this. So this was, but it was because he was then working for us, that Ranald at Historic Environment Scotland suggested that we might be a good fit because of our domestic work and because of Ian's expertise. So it did feel like a good fit in terms of architects. So the early stage was really just peeling back the layers and finding out how the house was made, and trying to understand how it had been put together. And we actually found a Swiss journal from the early 1960s that published a lot of Peter Womersley's details, which was obviously incredibly helpful in trying to determine how the house was made. Again, some more images of the salvage. So you can see the extent, bottom left image of the flooring of the travertine, in the top left image of the, there was upholstery in that corner in original Bernard Klein textiles. Now, one of the things that, again, we just have to give huge credit to our clients for this, was that they saw this and saw it as an opportunity much quicker than we did. That because of the fire, it presented us with the opportunity to say, well, what can we do to make the house as good as it can possibly be within the current regulatory system that we have in Scotland? Is there a way that we can put in a new underfloor heating system, thick insulation, air source heat pump, low energy electrics, that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do with the fire? And the answer, of course, is yes, absolutely. But it was an incredibly enlightened set of clients that really took us by the hand, and we walked together through that process. So here's a plan for the house, and you can see it's effectively the bottom left-hand section. So it's about half the house that was damaged by the fire in that quantum, or the smoke, or the water that was put out, that extinguished it, or the period, by the way, after the fire before we could get the heating on and start to dry it out as well, because that took a while as well. And here's again the Mesian planning of the elevations, very stripped back set of proposals. So after that process, we engaged a cabinet maker who was also a main contractor as Lawrence McIntosh to carry it out, because we knew that the timber work was going to be so important to this. As ever, there's real conservation challenges associated with that sort of a discussion. So for example, there were African hardwoods used in the original house, which are now endangered species. So the question is, well, what do? Do you specify an endangered species knowing that that's not a good thing to do? Or do we find a way to match it? And the answer, of course, is that you find a way to match it, but you have to find somebody that's willing to work with you to do that. And Lawrence McIntosh were really incredibly good at doing that. So this is the house after the work as proposed. We were really lucky to get this photographed in the autumn when the leaves were on the trees. Sorry, in that first image you can see very much why Bernard Klein wanted to be based in the middle of the countryside and to live in this off-grid house surrounded by the textures of the Scottish borders. And it really, you can see that goes all the way through into his textiles as well that he designed. This is the arrival to the house, so the carport to the left and the master bedroom to the right, with a panel of mosaics which Bernard Klein himself put together over the years that he was in the house. And that's the long elevation. So that's looking at it with the living room that was restored on the left-hand side of the image. It's basically the left half of the image. You can see the chimney just popping up there. And this is the restored living room after it was completed. So about 50% of the ceiling is new, just over that, 55–60%. You can see the new upholstered piece of furniture behind and to the left of the chimney, and the restored and slightly replaced walnut panel doors to the right-hand side, and then the console. Again, there's lots of sort of small things in conservation. So we discovered that Bernard Klein used to paint in the corner to the right-hand side where the desk is in that image, and he used the console to clean his brush on. And so we discovered Bernard Klein's brush strokes on that console, and we had to ask ourselves, well, do we want to keep those and seal in some of the fire damage, or do we want to make it look as good as new? Well, that was one of the things that we decided that was part of the heritage of the house, and that it's part of its story. So that's still there on that console. All of this needed to be taken away and remade, refinished. There were elements of it that were actually in pretty poor condition, I think, before the fire. So there was a restoration that needed to happen anyway as part of this. And again, views out through the house into the open landscape.
It is absolutely stunning, isn't it?
It's an incredible incredible house. There are a few buildings over the years that I visited where the level of refinement in the detailing and restraint shown is unbelievably impressive, and this is most definitely one of those houses. I think I would like to say, though, I think we were impressively forensic in how we worked out how it was made so that we could respect it in putting it back together again as well. And I'm really proud of the job that we've done in doing that.
Did you feel a huge sense of responsibility when you were doing it? Like a pressure from the community as well? Because I know.
Yeah, we at a very early stage, what we had the discussion with the clients that we're a young practice. I mean, relatively, we're almost 5 years old now. And while I maintain that we were the right architects for the job, we were aware that it was a project that doesn't come around really very often, something like that. And so we did have a weight of responsibility, but it was also an opportunity. And that so what we promised was that we would not talk about it until it was finished, and that we could show what a good job us and the clients in particular had done in respecting Klein and Walmersley's heritage. And that was incredibly important to us, that we only started talking about it publicly at the point at which we could show people that we had looked after the home, and really made to come full circle. You know, it's a wonderful building, an uplifting place to visit. It's pretty amazing just to see images of it, as we've said, and we really wanted to respect that heritage and to look after that, and to look up. You know, well-being operates on a few different tracks. Well-being for the users, of course. Well-being for the planet. Looking after, so in terms of trying to take it off grid, trying to make it self-sufficient, that's an important thread to this. But also well-being for the wider community, that when you have assets like this that are celebrated and lauded, you need to make sure that you look after them, and that definitely wasn't lost in the slightest on us, I would say. I just want to say a huge thanks as well to a few people beyond the people that work for Ian and I. We have a list of engineers, surveyors, suppliers, project managers, builders, cabinet makers, decorators, kitchen suppliers, photographers that we work with, and that what we do is but a tiny fraction of the work, really. But the most important people, and it's such a cheat always, is claiming this work as ours. It's at least as much the clients as it is ours. We're nothing without them, and we've been incredibly lucky to have a wonderful set of clients over those not quite 5 years. So we do need to recognize that it's not just our work. It's a lot. There's a lot of people that are involved. Yeah.
Well, so thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much.
So that leads me nicely into my kind of first question, really, is when you have these discussions with the clients about bringing in these well-being elements, is it primarily the clients coming to you with some ideas about this, or do they come to you with the problem, or, you know, the thing that's really bugging them about the property, and you come with the solutions, or is it a bit more of a fluid discussion?
I would say that it's never really, clients don't say we want well-being, that it's never phrased like that. It's not a thing. It's not a thing that's in a box that you put on to your project. It's teased out in conversations. For instance, we've got a client just now that we're looking at the property, and whether they, again, it's part of that, we're looking at whether they need to fully extend or whether they can adapt a room, etc. And through that conversation, we suggested a bedroom went on the ground floor and the other bedrooms were upstairs. And they've got young kids, and the idea of having one bedroom on the ground floor doesn't sit well. So that, because just that relationship between parent and child, and one child left out, so that's part of that well-being conversation, because there's an unease there. There's something that is going to niggle. So it's teased out through conversations like that. It's never really, a client hasn't really came to us and said we want well-being. That's not how it's phrased. It's achieved through how you, I'd say, primarily plan a building, the relationship between spaces, and then looking at the section, how do you connect garden to the interior, or whatever that, those spaces might be that offer up, those relationships that can support that lifestyle.
I think it's probably true of quite a lot of architects, but we would generally try and encourage people when they engage us to build as little as they need to, because it allows the money to flow into the quality of the materials and the quality of the spaces that they then subsequently have. So that I think is probably fairly important. There's a lot of people that would come and say, I want an extension, that we would then probably interrogate that and really pick away why they believe that that's the case as part of the briefing process. Because if the smaller amount of area that you're trying to affect, the better the more joyful you can make that space by investing in whatever it is that it's made out. I think that's pretty important to us.
Is that quite a difficult conversation sometimes? Well, so far so good.
I don't think it's a difficult conversation in terms of, we suggest it and clients don't like it, or I think it's just something that they've not been aware of to that stage, or maybe an approach they've not thought of. As Matt says, people typically, or people sometimes can think, we've got a problem, that relationship isn't quite right, let's build another room and that will solve the problem. Well, you might just be compounding the problems to the existing house by putting on this other room, that then that issue doesn't still get resolved. So then that ties into the idea about sustainability, because then you're not resolving the problem and prolonging the success of that property. If you're compounding it, it just prolongs that issue. So it's not a difficult conversation. I think it's just really about us being responsible enough to make them aware of that before they then step into that world of extending and spending the money that comes with it, etc. Right. Especially in the current climate now, where we've just seen the price of materials, etc.
Tell me about it.
Gents, it's been really easy to listen to you talk about your projects this evening, and I wonder, because there's such a strong sense of narrative about the way that you guys work, that capacity for storytelling, is that something you're sort of conscious of as you're designing and as you're discussing these things with your clients, or does that sort of come as a bit of a post-rationalization sometimes?
I think we're really thorough when we visit a site in the first instance, actually, that we do want to engage with people. I mean, I think whenever you meet somebody for the first time, you probably try and want to make a connection with a potential client, and you want to find a common ground. I think it's probably easier now in some respects than it was at the start, because we have this body of the work that generally people have seen and that they like. So you already have a common ground in that we have done something that people like, and therefore that there's already that common ground, I suppose. Whereas the first time round, that's a thing that you're trying to create out of thin air to some extent. But I think that we love working, very widely across the UK. We're not a Glasgow exclusive based practice, because ultimately going to visit a site in Manchester or a site in London or a site in Cornwall or wherever it is makes you go back to first principles. What is it about this space, that this area, that's special, and how do we respond to that as architects? Now, Ian will probably testify that I am an unbearably optimistic human being, and so whenever we're engaged about anything, sorry mate, I will always say, well, how do we make the very best of this context? How do we make the best of this? How do we take what it is commonly a fairly limited budget and really make it sing? And I think that that part of that is about really engaging with the motives behind a project, and that is what storytelling is. It's understanding what is driving people to want to do. Because it's not an easy thing to phone up a stranger and say, I want you to design a building for me. I mean, that's the reality. You're getting over that Rubicon and getting to the point that you're lifting the phone and talking to somebody. That's really hard. And so the least that we can do is listen to what is that motivation and really try and go along for the ride. Yeah.
I'd say that's a really important point, that, listening before you do anything, really being able to listen. As Matt says, you've got a sense of responsibility. When someone phones you up and asks you to design or alter or provide a family home, it's a huge sense of responsibility. So you really need to listen and understand the best you can. And it may not be post-rationalised, but it's nice to get to the end of a project and get that post-occupancy evaluation, if you want to put it like that. But to get the feedback that we had on the small job I was talking about in terms of the psychology of the space, it's fantastic, as an architect, to get to the end of a project and someone say that you've changed their life in a positive way is, great, and that your ideas and your thoughts, are reaffirmed. So it's nice. It's a lovely process when that happens.
Fantastic. I think we've got a quiet bunch here today, Chris.
Yeah.
Have you got any more questions, mate?
I don't have any others. Thank you, Dean. I've always felt, that it's the mark of a really good presentation if you're, if no one has any questions left at all at the finish. So
it's still early. Everyone's probably tired from work.
Everyone's waiting to get out the door to the pub.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. It's always lovely to talk to you about your wonderful projects, and I'm looking forward to seeing many more in the future. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We'll be making this available online, so if you want to rewatch, just watch out on our Instagram channel, and we'll get it published in the coming weeks. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.